The Atlantic Ocean, 1995. 3 miles below the surface, a robotic vehicle is crawling through the darkness. For half a century, nobody has seen this submarine. Nobody has touched it. And now, the machine has found something. Amongst the scattered debris, a metal box, intact, sealed. The crew watches in silence as it's hauled aboard. They all know what the I-52 was carrying. 2 tons of gold. The lid is forced open. Everyone leans forward, and what they find inside sends shockwaves through the entire crew. The crew don't know it yet, but what they're looking at isn't just a wreck. It is a time capsule from one of the most secretive missions of World War II. It was 1944. Japan and Germany were allies, but the oceans between them were controlled by the enemy. With both needing supplies for the war effort, it was agreed. A cargo submarine of the Imperial Japanese Navy would make the perilous journey from Japan to German-occupied France. Their cargo included raw materials for Germany's war effort, and gold, 2.2 tons of it, 146 gold bars packed in small metal boxes. In exchange for these goods, the Japanese would receive 800 kilograms, 1,760 pounds, of uranium oxide. This would give them the ability to create a nuclear weapon. It would give them access to technologies and materials unavailable in the Pacific. Captained by Commander Kameo Uno, I-52 set off on her maiden voyage on March 10, 1944, with 112 men on board. At 356 feet long, she was one of the biggest submarines in World War II. Designed and manufactured by the Mitsubishi Corporation, she could cruise along at 12 knots, covering a range of 20,000 nautical miles before being refueled. She was packed with goods for their wartime allies. Germany was running low on raw materials. Naval and air blockades made supply drops between them and Japan impossible. A submarine hidden deep underwater was the best option. Molybdenum and tungsten were loaded onto the sub, crucial for armored plating, aircraft, tanks, ammunition, and weaponry. Opium, caffeine, and quinine were packed in, fueling the soldiers on the front lines. And 14 Japanese technicians were also boarded. Their role: to study Germany's advanced weaponry systems. For the men aboard I-52, this wasn't just another patrol. Most had never crossed the Atlantic Ocean before. Many had spent years serving in the Pacific, operating much closer to home. Now they were traveling farther than almost any Japanese submarine crew had ever traveled. Life inside the submarine was cramped, humid, and exhausting. Bunks were shared. Fresh water was rationed. Machinery ran day and night. The smell of fuel, oil, and sweat clung to every compartment. Yet morale appears to have remained high. The mission was considered one of the most important undertaken by the Imperial Japanese Navy. The cargo packed into the submarine represented months of planning between Berlin and Tokyo. If the voyage succeeded, the crew would help reopen a lifeline between 2 allies separated by half the world. A lot was riding on this mission. But cutting through the Indian Ocean, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, and navigating through enemy waters of the Atlantic was fraught with danger. Commander Kameo Uno's destination was Lorient, on the coast of France. But during the voyage, he received news that Normandy had been invaded by Allied forces. The Allies were taking France back. He and his crew were heading into the heat of battle. And there was something else. Unbeknown to them, they were being watched by the enemy. Japan's naval cipher, JN-25, had been decoded by British codebreaker John Tiltman. And now radio transmissions between the I-52, Tokyo and Berlin were being intercepted by the US and British forces. They were reading Japanese naval traffic, every position report, every schedule update, every instruction sent across the radio. Commander Uno steered the sub out into the mid-Atlantic, 850 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands, where he would rendezvous with their German comrades. The crew believed they were slipping unseen through enemy waters. In reality, they were sailing into a trap. On the evening of the 23rd of June 1944, the men aboard the Hive 52 settled into another night at sea. Some would have been resting, others stood watch. Engineers monitored the machinery deep inside the hull. German U-boat U-530 surfaced at 15 degrees 16 minutes north, 39 degrees 55 minutes west. The rendezvous had begun. The Germans loaded the Japanese submarine with fuel for the second half of her journey and offloaded an advanced radar detector, along with 2 radar operators and a German liaison officer, crucial for their trip through the Bay of Biscay. It was a moonless night, complete darkness. Commander Uno and his crew would have felt reassured to have the expertise of German operators on board to help them make it to France. They were safe in that moment, in the middle of the Atlantic, before the final intense approach to France. But the crew were carrying a false hope. A US hunter-killer task force had been assembled. They had moved in to intercept the Japanese sub. Intelligence had given them the exact coordinates of the rendezvous, the precise time. And, as the German U-boat moved off, US Navy escort carrier USS Bogue moved into position. It launched its Avenger aircraft. Piloted by Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor and navigated by a rapidly malfunctioning radar, the Japanese submarine was picked up in the inky waters below. Commander Uno and his men were gliding along the surface at 15 knots when suddenly the roaring of the Avenger was picked up on their systems. They dived beneath the waves, all hands on deck as they knew what was coming. The silence of the night had been ruptured into a frenzy of evasive maneuvers. The tight, cramped conditions inside I-52 burst into life. Jesse Taylor dropped 2 flares, igniting the cold night sky, illuminating the Black Sea below. And there it was, a glimpse of the gold sub, its metal reflecting in the flare light before she dived below. Hurriedly, Taylor dropped 2 depth charges and watched as they exploded to the sub's starboard side. He had missed. Inside the metal cocoon, the Japanese crew heard the boom from the blasts. They felt the vibrations along the hull as they narrowly avoided a catastrophe. But it wasn't over. The hunt was now on. A terrifying game of cat and mouse as the Japanese desperately tried to evade capture. Beneath the Atlantic, Taylor could no longer see where I-52 was. The sea had sucked them in, embracing them in her depths, leaving no trace. But the Avenger had a trick up its sleeve. Taylor deployed a sonobuoy, a floating buoy with an underwater microphone used to detect underwater sounds. Taylor circled overhead, waiting, listening, and then it came. A transmission from the sonobuoy. It was the unmistakable sound of a propeller cutting through the water deep below. Taylor redirected his aircraft and dropped a Fido, code name for a Mark 24 anti-submarine acoustic torpedo. Once in the water, the torpedo honed in on underwater noises, the telltale signs of the submarine making a quick getaway. Somewhere behind them, the torpedo was closing in, hot on its tail, and seconds later, the inevitable. Taylor's sonobuoy picked up the sound of an underwater explosion, the hull breaking up. Death and destruction. Mission complete. But Taylor's feeling of success was short-lived. The sonobuoy's transmission pinged into life. The faint sound of propeller blades wafted over the static. Something was still moving down there. Was I-52 still alive? Taylor was relieved by Lieutenant William Flash Gordon, who dropped another Fido acoustic torpedo into the ocean. And moments later, there was silence. Just the eerie radio silence and the deep, dark Black Sea below. The following morning, when the sun's golden glow began emerging on the horizon, USS Janssen arrived at the battle site. It was a gruesome scene. Rubber floated on the surface, some silk material, and human remains. I-52 was gone, and with it, the souls of 112 men, 95 crew, 14 passengers, and 3 German personnel, and 2.2 tons of gold. For over half a century, the Atlantic kept its secret. The wreck of the 52 lay in total darkness, undisturbed on the seafloor, as if the war had never ended. A salvage expedition came up empty-handed in 1994, but historian Paul Tidwell spent 5 years meticulously piecing together evidence from that fateful night. Archives, ship and aircraft logs, and recalculating the battle site led him to a position 20 miles from the recorded location. Dragging a deep-sea sonar device over the side of a research vessel, detected something in the depths below. A strong signal pinged on the sonar. But Paul Tidwell and the research team needed definitive proof. They needed a visual. Using an underwater sled, installed with video and still cameras, the team lowered the contraption downwards. 7,000 meters of cable was relayed out as the sled sunk into the darkness. Carefully controlled from the research vessel, the sled drifted across the seafloor just a few meters above the Atlantic's dark bottom. And that's when they saw it. A debris field, a downblast crater, and the unmistakable shadow of something large, man-made, a sunken vessel. As they scanned closer, the image became clearer. This was a submarine hull, lying upright in position, resting silently in the darkness. The bow was crumpled and destroyed, likely the impact of hitting the seafloor. But the rest of the hull and the conning tower remain intact, as though they were on the surface only moments before. A large hole could be seen on the side just behind the conning tower, a gaping wound likely caused by the torpedo strike. As the deep-sea sled moved along the submarine's length, its identification became unmistakable. There emblazoned on the side in white paint were the characters I-52. They had found it. 5 years of investigations, trawling through first-hand accounts, wartime records and military data records had finally paid off. Directly below them lay one of the most valuable shipwrecks on Earth. 2.2 tons of gold, worth $190 million in today's money, locked away in a metal cocoon, waiting to be discovered. And whilst Tidwell and his team were down there, something caught their eye. The cameras on the rover had picked something up in the debris field. Unlike the bent and twisted metal lying all around, a single metal box lay perfectly preserved on the muddy bottom. It sat there intact, whilst the deep-sea sled hovered above it. And the same thought crossed everyone's minds. Was this one of the boxes? One of the ones that held the 146 bars of gold? Carefully, the team raised the metal box to the surface. Their hearts were in their mouths as it was hauled overboard. The last time it saw daylight was over 50 years ago, and now, perhaps this would be Tidwell's greatest find, the treasure he had been hoping for, the find of the century. They prized open the metal lid, eyes fixed on what was inside. The contents were carefully removed, slowly and deliberately, each person waiting anxiously, impatiently, hoping for a landmark discovery, until the truth became clear. It wasn't gold. Instead, it was a stash of opium. For a moment, nobody spoke. 50 years of speculation, decades of treasure hunting, and the first cargo recovered from Japan's legendary gold sub wasn't gold at all. It was narcotics destined for a wartime ally. Frustration and disappointment crushed the exploration crew. Finding the I-52 was a lifetime accomplishment, but finding the gold would have been the icing on the cake. The box proved that cargo had escaped the submarine, but it also confirmed something else. The treasure everyone had come searching for remained unfound. Somewhere in the darkness around I-52 Whether inside the pressure hull or buried in the debris field, the shipment remains exactly where it fell in 1944. The wreck discovery didn't answer the mystery everyone had been drawn in by. It created a new one, a new hope that there could still be gold lying hidden amongst the debris, buried in the sediment surrounding the RL-52. There was still a chance. Since then, Paul Tidwell had vowed to return to the wreck site to continue his search. But breaking into a sealed submarine is like waking the dead. Today, the I-52 remains where it fell, more than 4 miles beneath the Atlantic. The hull is silent, the torpedo wound is still visible, and inside are the men who never came home. The Japanese government considers the wreck their grave. No salvage operation is permitted. No recovery mission is planned. The gold remains somewhere in the darkness around I-52. Untouched, undisturbed. 112 men, 2 tons of gold, still waiting.